Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Really excited you're here. Excited for the show. We got Heather McDonald coming up in just a few minutes. But first, people are finally catching up to what we said from day one. As soon as this phone call was a thing, and as soon as we found out that it was about Biden's son, and this is what the Democrats were gonna try and impeach the president on, I remember thinking, really? This? Do you not see, Democrats, do you not see how you doing this will help Trump? You people still don't get it. How can you not get it? They don't. And they've played right into his hands the entire time. They've done it since the day he announced to run for president. Piers Morgan, who's been right about Trump all along, way back into 2016, he wrote an article about the Dems celebrating the impeachment. He said, to which my response is this: what are you clueless clowns celebrating? Are you just too dumb to see what's actually happening here? Do you not understand that it ends in a big loss for Trump haters and a big win for Trump? The bottom line is that for many Americans, this is a hard to understand scandal involving something that didn't happen. That's a key point. Involving a leader they've never heard of in a country they know little about. That's why the latest polls show plunging support for impeachment. That's why the Democrats don't have a cat in hell's chance of it succeeding. That must be a British expression. I've never heard of that. That's why Nancy Pelosi will need to keep that black dress and mournful face for next November. And that's why Trump's laughing all the way to re-election. Of course that's true. How did the Democrats not see that? The New York Times did a story just yesterday, and they had different reporters all across the country, and they interviewed different people, which is good. They got outside of their New York, DC bubble. And of the maybe 12 people they talked to, only one cared about impeachment. Not supported it, that person did, but only one of them even cared. Only one of them is even watching it. Only one of them even, not even an insignificant part of life. It's like on the radar. It's a blip on the radar. Only one of the 12. Here's just a couple. This is a guy in Houston. He was paying a parking ticket when they got him. I feel like he's good for America right now. He's a strong leader. They talked to some people in Chicago. They're at some Christmas market. They all agreed that Mr. Trump was likely to be reelected next year and that being impeached would not change anyone's mind. Why does the media act like this will change people's minds? Everyone knows it won't. Quote, it's all just partisan, seems like a waste of time. In Nashville, they talked to a Bernie supporter, and even he was against impeachment. The Bernie supporter was against impeachment for the million reasons we talked about this whole time. Not because they don't think he did anything wrong, but because it's going to galvanize his base. He said if he does get impeached, you got 80 to 90 million people who are now mad. And now they see the whole world against him, and you give him a higher chance of re-election. The Democrats made Trump a martyr. This is Trump's greatest dream come true. This is the campaign ad. Check out this one, just came out yesterday. Team Trump just came out with this one. Check out this 60-second ad.
And I accept your nomination.
Being president is a serious job. It's not hosting a talk show.
Will never be president.
That's gold. That's absolute gold. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they call you racist. And your vote for Trump proved them all wrong. Man, battle lines are drawn even clearer now than they were in 2016. And you got the Democrats to thank. Trump has the Democrats to thank for that. So much of politics is making an us versus them battle. And the Democrats have made that. They've made it even clearer than Trump ever could have dreamed of doing. This is the ad that we talked about yesterday, the picture that Trump sent out. In reality, they're not after me, they're after you. I'm just in the way. At the rally in Michigan, as he was being impeached, notice he said, we are being impeached. He didn't say I'm being impeached, he said we are being impeached. It's us versus them, and we're under attack, and Trump is Horatius guarding the bridge. And Democrats have made that as clear as ever. So who's the them, right? We did the us, that makes, that's, if you're Trump's words, Trump and his supporters, right? But who's the them and us versus them? It's the Democrats, of course, and the media too. Still, more than even 2016. And the Democrats and the media, that they're seen as one massive corrupt force by most Americans. Most Americans understand that they're just one. So Grabian put together the most embarrassing media moments of 2019. I want to play just a little bit of it here. This is a friendly reminder of who we are working against here.
Outrage over this now viral video showing high school teenagers harassing a Native American elder.
The Native American man who was beating the drum, Nathan Phillips, and those kids in the Make America Great Again hats that were kind of smirking at him and kind of looking down their noses at him.
As one smirking high school student blocks the elder's path.
The video appears to show dozens of youths wearing Make America Great Again hats.
Empire star Jussie Smollett was the victim of a vicious, racist, and homophobic attack.
His attackers hurled racial and homophobic slurs.
Not only homophobia, we're talking about racism, we're talking about hate with steroids.
They are looking for two suspects who were apparently wearing Make America Great Again hats.
The offenders uttered, "This is MAGA country."
This is stomach-turning, mind-boggling information.
This is a horrible story.
Yeah. Horrendous and unacceptable.
This is America in 2019.
And at that point, we are in high crimes and misdemeanor, and we are in impeachment territory.
Right. The spirit of what Trump did is clearly treasonous.
There's outright treason.
I think he's feeling the noose around his neck.
The noose is tightening.
He feels the noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
People might go to jail
You're exactly right.
for the rest of their lives.
I think they're all going to jail.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison, and maybe that's a good thing.
God.
Climate activist Greta Thunberg arrives in New York today with her campaign to save the planet.
Go, Greta, go.
I'm sorry, my brain is not working correctly.
We have activists like Greta Thunberg. The youngest person on the list, 16-year-old Greta Thunberg.
Like 16-year-old Greta Thunberg.
I am so smitten with this little girl.
She's elevated the issue, I'd say, more than most. Some are calling it the Greta Thunberg effect.
You could call it the Greta effect. She's amazing. Yeah. And so committed at such a young age.
Yeah, my favorite clip of that was the, "This is America, 2019. We could do that all day. My favorite fake news of his presidency was Inauguration Day. This is my favorite of them all, and it really set the stage. It was a Newsweek report, I think it was Newsweek, who said that Trump removed the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the White House. And it made sense because, I mean, we have a white supremacist in the White House now. And it turned out someone was just standing in front of it, and the reporter didn't see it. Imagine that. Imagine you got this reporter who he knows the bust is usually there, and he looks over, and it's not there. And jumps to this immediate conclusion that Trump removed it because he's a white supremacist. In reality, someone was just standing in front of it. Perfect example we talked about yesterday, how the media catastrophizes everything, assumes the worst at all times. And I think the biggest lie of his presidency so far from the media has been about Charlottesville, saying that Trump called the white nationalists there very fine people. It's so absurd. It's obviously he did nothing of the such. But it's whatever you want to believe. That's what politics is today. It's whatever you want to believe. So I play all that just as a reminder from just this last year of why he calls fake news the enemy of the people, and he's right. And by the way, that's another thing. He doesn't call news, the media, enemy of the people. It's fake news, the enemy of the people. And he's right. There will always be, the media will always be them to Trump. And us versus them, they're the them. And media, they're doing nothing. They're doing themselves no favors. Every day, making it themselves an easier and easy target. Trump's only getting stronger from all this. This is Jerry Nadler. This is from his website. In 2016, he wrote this. It's still there. He said, "We must do everything we can to stop Trump and his extreme agenda now. To achieve this, we must keep our eyes on two important goals. One, depressing Trump's public support, and two, dividing the congressional GOP from him and from each other. Have the Democrats depressed Trump's public support, And have they divided the congressional GOP? Nope. They've never been more unified. So why? What is all this? Why are they doing this? Why are they so crazed still? It all goes back to this moment. They still can't get over this.
He's not going to be the nominee, Chuck. I mean, as you know, I'm ahead in Ohio.
So, Jenny, could he actually win?
No freaking way!
He will be tempted to run, be predictably shellacked.
Do not tell me that Donald Trump is in this to win this, okay? He's a sideshow.
This is going to turn a three-ring circus into a freak show.
He's not running for president. He's running for Keep Me Famous.
I thought this was maybe some strategy for a new reality show.
How should Republicans handle Donald Trump?
Ignore him.
And Donald Trump is not going to be the nominee of this party.
Well, I don't think it's likely that Donald Trump will be the nominee.
Well, I do, based on your theme, believe that he's here to stay for a while, maybe through a few primaries, but he is not going to be the nominee.
Well, I'm going to support the Republican nominee, and I'm comfortable that it's not going to be Donald Trump.
There's not going to be a President Donald Trump. That's not going to happen.
Donald Trump will not become president.
He's not going to be president. He is not, Donald Trump is not going to be president of the United States. Take it to the bank.
Okay.
I guarantee it.
All right, all right.
I think if he becomes the president, he'll make it great, because the states is already great.
I think that man will be president of the United States right about the time that spaceships come down filled with dinosaurs and red capes.
On that note, Tom,
Take it from me. How about that?
So when you stand and deliver that State of the Union address, in no part of your mind or brain can you imagine Donald Trump standing up one day and delivering a State of the Union address?
Well, I can imagine it in a Saturday night skit.
I continue to believe Mr. Trump will not be president.
He will never be president of the United States.
And we better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket next.
I know you don't believe that, but I want to go on.
Sorry to laugh.
Okay, here we are. And which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones, right now, Donald Trump.
To become president-elect of the United States.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Complicated business. Complicated.
This is not the outcome we wanted or we worked so hard for. And I'm sorry that we did not win this election.
I love this country.
Ah, that's fun to watch. The cognitive dissonance is strong in them. It's fun to watch now. It's going to be even better in 2020. True story, Mike Slater. Heather McDonald coming up next. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. Really excited to talk to our next guest, Heather McDonald. She is a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, author of the new book, The Dimension Delusion. Heather, how are you today?
The dimension delusion, that's interesting. It's actually the diversity delusion, but maybe...
Maybe that's right. Maybe I knew where this conversation was headed, that we're living in alternate dimensions on colleges and in real life. That's your next book. The diversity delusion.
Yeah, right.
That's right. How has your life changed, particularly when the war on cops came out in 2016? What was your academic career prior to that and post, like speaking on college campuses, et cetera?
Well, I was doxxed for a while by the Black Lives Matter movement that published my personal information on the web, so I had a police protection crew outside of my apartment in New York for a while. Unfortunately, nothing came of that. But I guess I've become more and more of a threat to the students on college campuses who have been brainwashed into thinking that they are oppressed and that America society is dedicated to oppressing various high-status victim groups, whether it's underrepresented minorities or females. So I've become more and more toxic.
Yeah, and that's why they need to shut you down. I want to talk about this, your new article, the cost of America's cultural revolution. And I want to start off just at the very beginning about social justice. So how do you define social justice? And I also want to compare that to justice. So what is the noble thing of justice, and how has it been perverted into this social justice?
Well, justice is apolitical. Justice responds to the yearning of human beings and people in the West in particular to live in a system that is not biased by politics, to have the hope of coming before a neutral tribunal if they ever need to, that will apply the rule of law and not simply have revenge upon them because they're of the wrong political tribe. Social justice, when a school adopts that, is a highly political concept. It's based on that same view of the world, Mike, that I just outlined, which is that the Western civilization in general and America in particular is defined in its very essence by oppression, by racism, by white supremacy. And the social justice movement is designed to combat these forces. And it's also premised on what I think is the dividing line between the liberal and conservative outlooks or worldviews, which is that liberals refuse to acknowledge the role of personal responsibility or behavior in any given social outcome. So if we have poverty in America, they refuse to acknowledge that the biggest driver in American poverty is having children out of wedlock. That is a personal decision. It's something that is avoidable. And liberals will simply turn their eyes away from it and say, no, it's all about the injustices of capitalism and things that are beyond an individual's control. A conservative is going to be more likely to look at those decisions that people make that have a very large effect on where they end up in life. And the social justice worldview exclusively embraces the so-called structural explanations for socioeconomic disparities and poverty.
That's such a good point. And that is such an obvious delineation between conservatives and progressives, that worldview. Personal responsibility, conservatives, and the exact opposite of that is structural inequalities or whatever. That's so smart. Why do you think they chose the word justice out of anything else, right? And why social? But they could have done social, we're social progressives or social anything. Why did they pervert the word justice, do you think?
Well, the term actually comes from a liberal strain of Catholic theology from the 19th century. Wow. That said, we're not just going to assume that the outcomes of a neutral free market system are going to be fair. We're going to critique the very premises of that system and look at outcomes rather than inputs and opportunities. And if the outcomes do not satisfy our test for equity, then we're going to take on the system itself. So, one can have that as a political worldview. I think it's a wrong one. Again, I think that to stress systemic factors for social outcomes in America today is grossly misleading, and it takes our eyes away from the fact that there are some very severe cultural problems that are responsible for these inequalities today. But it's one thing to be social justice if you're a Catholic social worker, but if you're an educator and you make social justice your mission, that is a perversion not just of the ideal of justice, but it's also a perversion of what an academic endeavor should be.
Well, and that's why you talk about Max Weber. Whenever the man of science introduces his personal value judgment, a full understanding of the facts ceases. And I'm sure as every college campus you've been on lately, I'm pretty certain you see a lot of ceasing, not a lot of search for wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah. Well, what troubles or depresses me the most is the complete cessation of universities today to try to pass on our cultural inheritance. When I've been invited on campuses, I often have dinner with the small little band of dowdy conservatives who have invited me there, and I ask them what their majors are, what their favorite classes are, and it's really a horrible set of answers that I get, at least for me, who believe that passing on the inheritance of our civilization is the primary duty and privilege of higher education. Instead, what these students spout out about enthusiastically are, well, they're doing their communication studies, they're doing their media studies, they're doing their studies of comic books, Cuban comic books, movies, doing political science in a way that is so completely shallow and present-based, so they're analyzing the current presidential debates. I'm sorry, I know that there's a lot of political junkies in your audience, Mike, and that is a valid activity, but college is 4 years, 4 precious years, to immerse yourself in works of utter sublimity and beauty. And colleges have completely cast aside their obligation to take these ignorant students and try and cram as much knowledge of the past in their empty noggins as is possible within 4 short years.
So good. I want to. There's so much there I want to get to. I want to get to sublimity as well because you write about that here. But you also, so in this part of the article, you talk about debate scoring, masking as political science, as you just mentioned, and you say the focus of student attention is relentlessly presentist. I first came across this idea like a year ago or so. I forget who I was reading, but brought up the same thing you're talking about, how our colleges are so focused on the things of today and protesting at the Supreme Court justice nomination, whatever. And like, no, like the 4 years should be spent not on present things, but should be spent on what? Can you go a little deeper into that? What should these 4 years be spent doing?
Well, Western civilization is an extraordinarily exciting story. How we developed concepts that now are responsible for, to the extent that justice exists across the globe, that is all an import from what came out of the Western tradition. Ideas of limited government, due process, individual rights, neutral tribunals, the ability to overcome what is the core reality of human beings, which is tribal hatreds, and extending our sense of belonging beyond the narrow tribe. How that began in the pre-Socratic era, in the early Mediterranean, and then reached a very important starting point in Periclean Athens. I would say the extraordinary comedies and tragedies of ancient Greece, whether it's Aeschylus's Oresteia, a trilogy that describes the birth of a neutral tribunal away from the endless retribution of blood, vengeance, through language of just terrifying depth and mystery, through to the Middle Ages, the development of scholastic philosophy, medieval romance that became the 19th century realistic novel. How did that happen? How did we go from allegory to a sense of a detailed exploration of social relations and individuals that are characterized in literature? There is so much there. There is so much beauty, whether it's Mozart or Chopin or Brahms. All of this, maybe students will be so insightful and present to discover it for themselves. The chances are that they're not, that we live ever more surrounded by a world that is bombarding us with these presentist, as you say, Mike, signals that are hugely distracting. But it is the plunge into the past that is the unique opportunity and value added of a university.
As you were doing that, I want to go back to college so badly. I want to do it again. I feel like I wasted those 4 years and I didn't know what it could have been. And I want to do it again. And what a shame. And I was a history major too, and I didn't do any of these things. We got to take a break in 1 second, but when a student doesn't have those Western foundational inputs into their soul, what are they lacking when they become an adult?
Well, there's two issues. There's the sense of having explored beauty, which is an end in itself. I mean, for me, my education was wildly deficient too. I didn't take any history because my professors had so abdicated their intellectual responsibility to say, we know things that you don't. We know things that are necessary to become an educated human being. History is one of them. So I was absolved from that both duty and privilege of studying history. But nevertheless, what I do know, having studied art history, it gives me a compass. It gives me a set of points that I can understand the visual development in Western civilization and have some sense of how that interacts with different government forms. But it also gives these students no capacity in a present moment to judge or push back against this claim that they are oppressed. It's simply ridiculous. I was recently at Holy Cross by students who chanted, "My oppression is not a delusion." That they think of themselves as oppressed. They are so ignorant of the rest of the world and real homophobia, real misogyny, real racism, real tribal warfare, as well as what the past has been, how hard it was to wrench governments that respected freedom of speech. You know, our First Amendment was a thing of absolute unforeseen power because the norm for governments throughout history and even today outside of the West is to suppress speech that they view as dangerous. We don't.
So they lose all perspective. These kids have lost all perspective. Amazing. Heather, I hate to cut you off there. We got to take a quick break. Can you stick around? Because I want to talk about the last sentence in your article where you talk about beauty, but I really want to break down sublimity and wit because you don't hear those words around a lot. Heather McDonald, a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Her book is The Diversity Delusion. Maybe the next one's the delusion or the dimension delusion. But right now it's the diversity delusion. Heather McDonald, more with her coming up next. Mike Slater. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. So exciting to talk to Heather McDonald from the Manhattan Institute. Her new book is The Diversity Delusion. Please go buy it and watch as much as you can about Heather online. Heather, thanks for sticking around. So your most recent article, as we've been talking about, the last line, it stood out to me, and I have so many questions. You say the social justice crusaders are stripping the future of everything that gives human life meaning. Beauty, as you just talked about, being an end to itself. I love that. Sublimity and wit. Oh, what do you mean by those? Okay, let's start with sublimity. What is sublimity?
Sublimity is a sense of being taken outside of yourself into something larger than yourself, confronting forces and ideas that you can barely understand. It was an 18th century aesthetic concept, but for me, it is best exemplified by something I mentioned earlier, Mike, which is these Greek tragedies. I was fortunate to have a very fantastic teacher in college who taught the Greek theater traditions, and he conveyed something. It was these religious festivals to Dionysus, where you had the playwrights Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, who were working on these myths that Homer had worked with, the House of Atreus, Odysseus, the Clytemnestra, Agamemnon. These stages would be 3 actors chanting with masks and a chorus that would move with the movement of the verse, singing and chanting in a way. And when I read the language of Aeschylus, he is positing forces of the human drives that for a college student are more primal, more primitive than most of us can possibly understand. But the language takes you into a realm of strangeness, and of beauty that you otherwise would not experience. The 18th century. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, when you said taking out of yourself,
Yes.
could the search for sublimity be the antidote to the narcissism that we're seeing today? Or is it even more than that? And maybe you can give it as an example of something in today's world that touches the sublime so that I can even know what we're striving for. Like, what's the goal? What is sublime?
Well, you've hit a nail on the head in that the purpose of education is to take students out of their petty, narrow selves into worlds that are vastly larger than their own, things that are truly different, which again is the way that the past experienced human life, which is very different than ours. Now we have students that are engaged in this narcissistic nasal gazing, saying they only want to study books, if that, I mean, that match the trivialities of their gonads and melanin, which are accidental characteristics of the self that they use only because they claim that it defines their own oppression. As far as what are contemporary works of sublimity today, I'm hard pressed to see what's being produced. I would say, again, I'm sorry, I have to draw on the past. Bach's St. Matthew Passion, which, whether you're not a believer or not, I happen not to be, is nevertheless conveys with utter heart-wrenching poignancy the sorrow of the Christian story. It ends on a note of heartbreaking reconciliation. There's a penultimate bass aria that every time I hear it, it brings tears to my eyes, called in German Mache dich mein Herz rein, which translates as heart, make yourself pure because I'm going to bury my Jesus in you. And it just, wow. I tear up just thinking about it, because it's sung with such comfort and both sorrow and reconciliation. It's unbelievable. So if you want instances of sublimity, Mozart's Don Giovanni, which combines an effervescence, an erotic drive, a sense of the power of desire, with extraordinary music. So I would just say, go to YouTube and start hopping between some of the great works of Western classical music.
Yeah, I love that, because what I'm hearing here is those are works of depth, and we live in such a shallow culture, and so fast. It's so fast, quick, shallow, skim. But to focus on something that has a depth of emotion, and that's beautiful. So Robert Greene, the guy who wrote 48 Laws of Power, last we talked to him, I said, hey, what are you doing next? He says, I'm debating between a work on something or on the sublime. And I was like, oh, do that. And I don't know what he's doing right now, but I hope his next work is about the sublime, and we can have even more examples and inspire our culture to make some new ones. We only got literally 1 minute, Heather, but what do you mean by wit? That we need more wit? I
think comedy is the greatest accomplishment of human beings, and
wow.
The evidence is there's very few of them. If you look at the literature or the operatic literature, the ratio of comedies to tragedy is like 1 to 100. It's incredible. Tragedy is very easy. You get some melodramatic deaths and but comedy, to turn it for human beings to satirize their own foibles, to distance themselves from it, which comedy requires, and to look at the self with a lack of maudlin victimology. To farce is a fantastic creation. That to me defines the best of human beings.
And that's probably why the progressives are trying to shut it down. It makes perfect sense. Heather McDonald, it has been an honor to talk to you. Please keep up the wonderful work. Don't let the people shut you down on these college campuses. You're doing really important work, and I'm super grateful for you.
Mike, and if you could mention the article where it's...
Oh, yes. It is, where should people find it? It's City Journal, right?
city-journal.org. And
okay, and I'll put it on my, yeah, and I'll put it on my Twitter, of course. The Cost of America's Cultural Revolution. Read that, and then go back by the War on Cops and the Diversity Delusion as well. Heather, I hope we talk again. Have a great new year.
Thanks, Mike.
More coming up. True Story with Mike Slater. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. I feel like after we, just following Heather there, we sort of mentioned this, that things move so fast and the news cycle is so fast that a story happens, and these days, no matter what it is, you get a couple hours of the story and then we move on, and some things deserve a more in-depth analysis. And one of them is the executive order that President Trump signed the other day about anti-Semitism on college campuses. So to explain all this for us, Jonathan Tobin is here. He is the editor-in-chief of JNS.org, and he also writes at the New York Post and the National Review. Mr. Tobin, how are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me on, Mike. It's great to be with you.
Really good to talk to you. Yeah, so I want to talk about the executive order, but before we do that, how would you describe the current state of anti-Semitism in America, but particularly on college campuses?
Well, I think there's no question but that there is a rising tide of anti-Semitism that has been sweeping across the globe as a general rule, and it's established a foothold in this country largely on college campuses, where theories about intersectionality and libels about Israel have become the veil that covers traditional anti-Semitic tropes and intimidation and invective. And that's why it is largely a focus of the Jewish community about anti-Semitism has been in part about what's going on in campuses, as well as obviously, white nationalist extremists, people who have shot up synagogues. But there's also the fact that anti-Semitism, as far as most Jews in terms of their contacts, surveys have shown that young Jews are actually more likely to have encountered anti-Semitic activity than older ones, specifically because of what's going on in the academy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but I remember talking about it a while ago. We always hear about the rise of Islamophobia, but if you look at the actual numbers from the FBI hate crime statistics, there's a very small amount of Islamophobia hate crimes. Yeah, there's a rise, but it's from a very small to still a small. But the number of anti-Semitic attacks and hate crimes is huge, like way bigger, like order of magnitude bigger, and also rising, as you just stated. So and maybe this is even a more foundational question. I never understood it. Why do you think there is anti-Semitism, just historically even? It makes no sense to me, let alone now.
Well, first, you raise an excellent point about the FBI statistics. I've been following this for the last decade, and there has not been a year since 9/11, when supposedly this country was undergoing a post-9/11 backlash against Muslims, when crimes against Jews, that when they break down hate crimes, those that are based on religion and ethnicities, the overwhelming majority, every single year since 9/11, have been directed at Jews. Yes, there's been in the last few years a bit of a rise against Muslims as well. That's lamentable. I mean, one hate crime is always one too many, but it's always been primarily focused against Jews. Now, as to why there is anti-Semitism, well, Mike, we could both write books, and there have been untold numbers of doctoral theses written about that. On one foot, as we would say, I would say, listen, the Jews have always been the other of Western civilization, the boogeyman, the scapegoat. That dates back to ancient times, primarily because the Jews were a people that introduced monotheism into Western culture and refused then to assimilate and go away, as so many, almost all ancient civilizations did. The Jews are still with us. I'm speaking as a Jew. I'm glad we are. And, that's a basic fact, but it has to quote a famous scholar, Ruth Weiss, she wonderful insight. She said that anti-Semitism was the most successful ideology of the 20th century because it was like a virus that was able to mutate and to attach itself to every other big ideology, whether it was fascism, Nazism, communism, in our own time, Islamism, and become part of it. It's adaptable, and it's a ready-made scapegoat and a set of people to hate and excuses for anybody for their complaints about the world. So it's there, it's reality, it's not going away.
That's a great answer.
Campuses,
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt. Let's bring it to now. So, what is the executive order that Trump signed? What does it say exactly?
Well, that's an important question because there has been so much disinformation, even in like supposedly reputable and authoritative sources like the New York Times, where people said, "Oh, it's about Trump is trying to redefine Judaism and make it so that Jews are not Americans; they're treated as a separate nationality." That is entirely false. What it is about, and this is to sort of get it, it's a little complicated, but it's actually it sounds complicated, but it's simple. The 1964 Civil Rights Act has a provision called Title VI. And Title VI means, and it sets into motion, whereby acts of discrimination against minorities, whether ethnic, race, creed, or color, is not allowed on college on institutions that get federal funding. The federal government took on the idea that anything they were funding was not going to subsidize hate. In the form of, in that time, it was obviously aimed at African Americans, but it was applied to everyone. That's what the federal government had taken on that obligation with the Civil Rights Act. However, there was a gap in it. And in that, hate directed at people because they were perceived as being part of an ethnic group. And that applies to Jews, Sikhs, Muslims as well. They were not covered by the original text or the original interpretation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The George W. Bush administration issued a legal opinion about this and said, yes, it should apply to all minorities, including Jews, not treating them as any differently, but because they were not, anti-Semitism, acts of intimidation wasn't covered under the way the law was originally interpreted. The Obama administration agreed. And in fact, Tom Perez, whom we know now as the chairman of the DNC, he was 8 or 9 years ago, he was the assistant attorney general, and he actually wrote an opinion agreeing with the Bush administration that saying, yes, these protections should be applied to Jews as well in cases of anti-Semitism. The difference between the Obama administration and the Trump administration on this issue is not over, whether there should be such protections, but it was the Obama administration was not interested in actually applying the law. Every time they were presented with a case, whether it was something that happened at Rutgers University, acts of anti-Semitism that the university appears to have tolerated, Obama gave it a pass. His Justice Department wasn't interested in prosecuting. His Department of Education wasn't interested in applying the restrictions that they could and saying, well, if you don't stop this, we're going to cut off funding. The Trump administration, under in his education department, led by Betsy DeVos, and her head of the Civil Rights Division, Ken Marcus, has changed this. They're applying the law. And what Trump did with the executive order was to formalize this, saying these protections will be applied to Jews. It doesn't change the status of Jews, but it does protect them against anti-Semitism. And it's necessary, not just because, in principle, that sounds like a nice thing, but because there are groups operating on American campuses under the guise of advocacy for human rights. They call themselves Students for Justice in Palestine. And they violate, the State Department and the U.S. government accepts the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, which includes demonization of Jews, demonization of Israel, saying that there has no right to be one Jewish state on the planet, a variety of traditional anti-Semitic activity that is carried on by people who are supposedly just advocating for justice for Palestinians, when in fact they're targeting Jews. The whole BDS, the movement to boycott, divest, sanction Israel is primarily, it doesn't really affect Israel. Israel is a massive first world economy, trades with everybody. The BDS hasn't laid a glove on the Jewish state. It targets American Jews and American Jewish kids on college campuses because it seeks to isolate them, shun them, silence them, and to even
other them, which is as you talked about earlier. So I love all this, Mr. Taub. I think this is all spot on. I'm down with this. This sounds great. But I always try to think, before I go all in support of something, I try to think where this could be used in a not good way. Like where could it be misapplied? Where could it be taken advantage of? So is there any argument, or what's the best argument against it, or anything that you think maybe we should watch out for as this is applied?
Well, the question is, does it restrict free speech? Now, as people, as libertarians with a small L, that's a big issue and something that we should care about. And that's one thing that critics of this, and the critics have, kind of, their heads are exploding because for so many people on the left, they have this belief that Trump is an anti-Semite, even though he's the most supportive president we've ever had of Israel, even though he's condemned anti-Semitism, even though it's Jews in his family. But they've tried to say that this is really a dog whistle to white supremacists, which is crazy. But the better argument, although still not a good one, is that it's restricting free speech. It's going to make it impossible to discuss the Middle East on college campuses and restrict scholarship. Well, this is nonsense. This doesn't stop anybody from criticizing the policies of the state of Israel. I mean, heck, 7 million Israelis get up every day and criticize their government. It's like, hundreds of millions of Americans get up every day and criticize their government. About efforts to eliminate Israel. This is about efforts to use anti-Semitic tropes to demonize Jews and Israel, and to demonize and to shun and other American Jewish kids. So the point is, it's not restricting anybody's scholarship or free speech. Put it this way: if there were an American university that had a curricula, in a course taught by accredited and tenured professors, preaching hate against African Americans or Hispanics. Basically, if there was a curricula that backed the agenda of the Ku Klux Klan, the federal government would be on them, in a second, cutting off funding and making a meal out of it, as they should. Title VI of the U.S. of the '64 Civil Rights Act. What here is the same thing. There was a case in where Duke University and the University of North Carolina had a joint program on the Middle East, which basically followed the agenda of Hamas and of the BDS movement. And what happened a couple of months ago is the Department of Education said, "You really think we're going to fund this? You have to change this, a violation of Title VI." That's all this is about.
That's great. And the best argument you made, I think, too, other than the common sense of it all, is that this was a W, and now Trump's executing it. So, Jonathan Tobin, editor-in-chief, JNS.org, New York Post, National Review. Sir, perfect, eloquent, articulate, to the point. Love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll wrap up next with the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Dennis Prager wrote an article the other day about why the left hates Christmas. Actually, there was a moment from the debate yesterday that fits nicely in with this, actually. The moderator mentioned Obama last week, saying that if women were in charge of the world, then you'd see significant improvement in just about everything. And then he said that most of the problems are caused by old men who are not getting out of the way. And then, taking this question here.
Senator Sanders, you are the oldest candidate on stage this evening.
And I'm white as well.
That's awkward. Why did he feel the need to say that? Because he had to complete the triumvirate. He had to complete all the sins of identity politics, as we were talking about with Heather McDonald in the second and third segment of the show. Bernie is a man. He's old. And white. Ah, dun, dun, dun. He's all three. That's the worst. So are you surprised that the left doesn't like Christmas? They hate old people, white people, and men. Might as well throw in Christmas as well. One of my favorite stories of the week, and it sort of got overlooked. Neil Gorsuch, the Supreme Court Justice, he was on Fox. And some writer for the BBC and some other places said, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch just appeared on Fox and Friends making a point to parrot the Merry Christmas talking point of the GOP. Parrot the Merry Christmas talking point. And then it was something like, if he's willing to do this, then what else is he willing to do? And I thought, oh, geez, what did he say? I read that before I saw the clip. What did he say? Did he say that we need more nativity scenes in public places? Should we bring prayer back in school? Should we stop calling it winter break and call it Christmas break? Like, what inappropriate thing could Neil Gorsuch possibly have said that would make this woman so upset? Here's the moment.
Joining us now for a rare live interview, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Good morning to you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. I love that you say that.
That's it. That was it. That was parroting the GOP's talking point on Merry Christmas, saying Merry Christmas. And I love that moment too because people on the left mock conservatives by saying, oh, there's no war on Christmas, you idiots, you're just looking for trouble, there's no such thing as a war on Christmas. And then the Supreme Court Justice says, Merry Christmas. Oh, unbelievable! Parroting GOP talking points, outrageous. Come on. As one of my favorite responses to it was someone said, beyond improper. Justices should uphold the honor of the office. Come on. What else is he willing to do? Oh, I'm not sure. What else would he said Merry Christmas. What else is he willing to do? Heaven forbid someone sneeze around him. He might say, God bless you. Oof. Then we got to start impeaching Supreme Court justices. Anyway, back to Dennis Prager. He said the left hates Christmas because two reasons mostly. First, Marx and Lenin, they regarded religion generally, and Christianity specifically, as the opiate of the masses. It's an opiate, so it keeps you dumb and numb and prevents you from engaging in proper revolution. Similar thing today, right? The more Christians and really the more religiously involved people in general, the less chance a different religious organization, the Democratic Party, has to gain power. We shouldn't be worshiping politics, which is what our culture is doing more and more of, and which the political parties want you to do too. Second reason is the left regards Christianity as an intrinsic part of America's national identity, and it's an identity that it wishes to erode in favor of the world citizen identity. So it's the same idea behind getting rid of George Washington's birthday and Thanksgiving, and soon we're going to be getting rid of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and I think the next is going to be the 4th of July. They're going to start calling it like Slaves Day or something to remember, in light of the 1619 Project and America's real founding. So you got to get rid of the 4th of July if you want to lift up America's real founding. So it's just eroding, tearing down, crumbling America's true identity. So Christmas, and part of our Christian national identity. All good things the left wants to destroy. Prager had a great line a couple of weeks ago. He said, the left hates the Salvation Army. That's all you need to know about the left. But that's not who we are. You know who we are? We are Jack and Violet. Jack and Violet were in New Zealand. They're flying to New York, long flight. And they struck up a conversation in the airport. And before they boarded, Jack talked to the gate agents there and asked if he could switch seats. Why? Maybe he wanted to sit closer to Violet. Or maybe, geez, I don't know, maybe he wanted to get further away from her. I don't know. Why did he want to switch seats? Jack was in first class, and he thought that 88-year-old Violet would get more out of that first class seat than he would. The only reason this story got out is that one of the flight attendants shared a picture of it and said that Jack sat in a row of seats directly next to the toilets in the back, and coach next to the toilets, never made a peep, never asked for anything, no fuss, no attention, literally did it out of the kindness of his own heart, and no one asked him to. Violet said it was always a dream of hers to sit in first class. And the flight attendant said you should have seen her smile when she was done with her dinner and they handed her a blanket to go to sleep. Pretty good. So we need to all be more like Jack. My favorite part of the story is, it's not that he gave up his seat, that's good, but it's that he didn't tell anybody about it. That's how you know online stories are fake. When a person tells the dramatic tale and then says, and then I said, and then I did this heroic, noble deed. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. That was all up in your head. That's what you wish you said or you wish you did, and you have to now project that out to the world for some reason. Like imagine if Jack wrote out a post, so everyone, I just decided to give my first class seat to this 88-year-old woman. Aren't I amazing? No, you're not amazing anymore. You may have even done it. Still not amazing. Your points are canceled. Any bonus points you received are hereby revoked because you broadcast to the world. That's not what Jack did. He didn't tell anybody. Didn't brag about it, didn't complain about it, just sat in another seat, and that was the end of it. And that's what Matthew 6 says. Be careful not to perform your righteous acts before men. If you do, you will have no reward for your Father in heaven. Do not sound the trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and the streets, to be praised by men. Truly, I tell you, they already have their reward. But then if you don't tell anyone, the problem with that is no one will ever know about these good deeds. So we also have to be more like that flight attendant and keep our eyes open for people like Jack so that we can blast the trumpets on their behalf. And we got to be more like Violet too, and be grateful and appreciate the little things in life. So we got Christmas next week. We'll be here. We got some shows coming up, but let's be more like Jack and do the good deed. Let's be more like the flight attendant, keep our eyes open for goodness. And let's be more like Violet and appreciate the seemingly little things of life. It's a true story with Mike Slater. We'll see you on Monday.